go.
Good afternoon. I'm Jamie Montgomery. Thank you for joining us this afternoon for a terrific session on the world of investing post-COVID. I'll be joined today by two other panelists and a terrific moderator. Sheila Golotti is the founder and managing director of Tola Capital in Seattle, a venture capital firm that invests globally in enterprise software companies across multiple stages. She's a seasoned software expert. I was worried about that seasoned bit, Sheila. Software expert with a wide range of industry experiences, blending financial and strategic acumen with operating insights and deep technology knowledge and passion for building great businesses. Prior to founding Tola in 2010, she spent over a decade at Microsoft and various executive roles, and she started her career back when I first came across her at Robertson Stephens. And she's an icon, a growing icon in the technology investment world in Seattle, and pleasure to have you here with us today, Sheila. We're also joined by Nagraj Kashyap. Nagraj is the newest managing partner of the SoftBank Vision Fund. Many of you know him. His most recent role as a corporate vice president and head of M12 investing for Microsoft, in essence, Microsoft Ventures. Prior to that, he ran Qualcomm Ventures and held various executive roles and had done hundreds of investments between Qualcomm and Microsoft. So over 20 years experience in venture capital, corporate development, and technology. Michael Milken is our moderator today. Michael Milken, Mike, as we'll call him today, is a global icon in the investment. I'll tell you a little story. In 2017, the book Americana was published. It's a 400-year history of capitalism in America. And it has a chapter on the most significant figures. Well, there's not many people alive today who have a whole chapter in that book, but Mike deservingly has one. He is a pioneer both in financial technology, financial acumen, human capital, and social issues. Mike, following the summit last year, or just before the summit last year, he oriented the full resources of the team and the Milken Institute to focus on responding to the coronavirus. Spent hours each day speaking to individuals from a variety of sectors and industries to provide them unparalleled insights, both the impact on the crisis, the efficacy of our response, the opportunities which will emerge post-crisis. He's perfectly well positioned to lead this discussion for a number of reasons. His impact across society is really unparalleled in my world. From us enjoying the great talk by Amanda Graves, the youthful poet laureate who's a Milken Fellow, to watching Mike help facilitate a cure for both COVID and for cancer, and his role in counseling senior government financial ministers from around the world in the response to the economic crisis last year. He's had a tremendous impact. Mike, thank you for joining us today and leading the session. And Sheila and Nagraj, thank you as well for making yourself available.
So Jamie, it's my pleasure to be with the three of you today. Only thing I regret is we can't reach out and touch. But next year at the Montgomery Summit, I am sure that will happen. And for me, the exciting thing about the Montgomery Summit every year is it gets me a chance to see the world as it will be in the future today, and with people focused on that. I'd probably like to start, Jamie, with you if I could. What are the overall trends that you have seen developed over the last 11 months since the emergence of COVID-19?
Well, there's two ways to think about that. One is the level of investments. 2020 and 2019 were pretty similar, a number of venture investments in the US, about 12,000 each year, about 150 billion put to work. But more and more of the money went into later stage companies and helping them scale. And I think we're seeing that same phenomenon throughout 2021. And from a technology or sector point of view, we've really seen an acceleration of automation, whether it's in e-commerce enablement, IT operations, work from anywhere, automating the protection of this increased surface area for attack. Cyber is at an all-time high in terms of tempo of attacks and responses and spending. 5G is slowly making appearance. No one's noticing it, but it's the elephant in the room. I think it's going to have a huge impact. And Nagraj got a lot of background there from his days at Qualcomm. It becoming a much more of a data economy. We talk about CDPs, customer data platforms, more and more important. And just, it's just been an acceleration. We're obviously losing areas as well, but the losers have really lost the more, but there's some really big emerging areas. I think one area that you've got a lot of experience and we can talk about today is fintech. I think the media industry has been totally disrupted. The technology industry was getting more and more disrupted last year. It accelerated as everything moved to the cloud away from legacy systems. I think fintech is really ripe for disruption. We're just in the early innings of that.
So in many ways, when we step back and look at fintech, Jamie, this is a list of the 10 most valuable finance companies here in the US. And you'll see here the most valuable is Visa, enormous investment in technology. But I'd highlight the third most valuable today is PayPal. And the increase last year in PayPal's valuation is equivalent to the market cap of Goldman Sachs and Citibank put together. And so that's just 1 year's growth in PayPal, which once again is a digital fintech company interacting with 350 million people around the world today, had the third largest market cap, at least a week ago, when we prepared these to look at. But let's step back. And I did podcasts with the former CEO of Microsoft, Steve Ballmer, former CEO of Google, Eric Schmidt, and with Nicola Mendelsohn, Lady Nicola Mendelsohn, who runs Europe, Africa, and the Middle East for Facebook. One thing all three of them said was tell everything, and we're not turning back. Maybe starting with yourself, Sheila, what is the most impactful changes have you seen in the last year? And which ones do you think will be lasting and which ones do you think might reduce over time?
Thanks, Mike. I think to your point of kind of tele everything, we're not turning back. There's an absolute gorgeousness to allowing people to live and work where they choose to do that and to make a decision about what home looks like for them. I ran a team of architects at Microsoft, and they were customer-facing architects as Microsoft was really rolling out .NET as a paradigm. That team was incredibly strategic to the company. They were super high-end talented people that could walk into Fortune 500 companies and help them with their overall architecture. That was an incredible team because we allowed people to live anywhere. So we had team members in Greensboro, North Carolina, in Bend, Oregon, in Maui, and we actually didn't care where they lived in that instance, right? That was a very uncommon thing for us to do at that time at Microsoft. But allowing for that allowed us to have some of the best technical talent in the world. And those people were so thrilled to be able to have such an incredibly intellectually stimulating job, but to also be able to choose their home environments. And so I think that that's one thing that the best people in the world will choose where they live and will not go back on this kind of hybrid universe of remote, broad collaborative. And frankly, as you look at companies become more global, we will actually probably get better at running global companies as a result of the communications that we had to really pioneer because of the pandemic. I ran a business for Microsoft also in India. People used to call me in the middle of the night all the time because India is often 12.5 hours from Redmond, Seattle time. And that was really difficult for people to get their heads wrapped around at the time, right? To try to be working back and forth. And it's interesting, today we see, solutions and applications where when you click to schedule, it looks at the home time zone of everyone and says, hey, here's the most polite time, or here's where we should, attach and shift the meetings to. So I think that allowing for this gorgeousness of working everywhere is an interesting trend that's here to stay.
It's interesting, Sheila, when you mention India to the west coast of the United States, We hired an individual who was also based in Seattle to run one of our education companies, digital education companies, and 80% of his team was in Bangalore. The problem we had is he was a cricket fanatic. And so
Those are multi-day situations.
During this, these particularly important cricket, I don't think he ever slept, and we assumed his productivity was dropping. And so I went over to his house, and he had a dish that must have been 12 by 14 on his roof, getting the cricket game. So for him, he moved to Seattle, but the cricket in him never left India from that standpoint. Nagraj, let me ask you that same question. What is the most impactful change you have seen in this past year?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. First of all, I do want to start off by saying, we're all in the tech industry, and the last year has really shown what a privilege and it is to be in an industry where we have adapted to work despite, sort of the pandemic or once in a lifetime pandemic that affected us. So I think we definitely are very privileged, and I think we just want to acknowledge that before moving forward. On the change, I mean, Sheila mentioned this, but the idea that the tech industry, which includes both digital and physical, could be productive without being in a physical location altogether, that idea has completely been validated now. I mean, I think some of the companies on the startup side, like I think GitLab, which by the way is not something I've invested in, were pioneers of this all remote approach. But now many more have figured out that that can work completely fine. At the very least, even when we are all able to meet, like you said, reach out, travel, there is going to be some form of hybrid workplace that will last well beyond this pandemic. I mean, this is like the clock is not turning back. So I do think that is the most impactful change we've seen, because that's also going to be lasting change. It's not just a 12-month change. It will last for a long time. So it is another idea which I was discussing with one of my VC friends yesterday. Was Jamie mentioned a lot of the money going into the late stages. That is true, and I think the companies have shown that, unlike 5, 6, 7 years back, when for a software company you give them 20 million, that's good. You give them 40, they get defocused. They actually don't grow at the same rate. But today, you give them more money and they've shown they can scale. One of the things that doesn't scale, your customers are more, there's digital transformation happening, but you still have to hire people. And what the global way of working has shown is many companies that are getting these large amounts of capital are not just scaling in the Bay Area. You cannot scale. You get $100 million, you can't hire. The people are the same people just before you got the 100 million, and everybody else is getting 100 million. So companies are hiring across the globe, and India is not the only destination. I mean, it's just so many different parts, whether it's Eastern Europe, all over, companies are able to hire with the new capital and then grow faster. So all of that is enabled really by what we've all gotten used to over the last 12 months.
So I'd like to change maybe the question, start with you, Jamie. What has surprised you the most that you just didn't expect would happen in the last 11 to 12 months? Jamie?
I think it's really the acceleration, Mike. We were sitting here in March, and we had a credit crisis as well as a global pandemic, and we're worried about freezes and spending, and then all of a sudden we had this acceleration. And I think we're probably surprised by how quickly business recovered and then accelerated. Our goal was to build long-term sustainable market-leading companies, and to do that, you really pick an area where you feel it's inevitable that's going to happen, and whether it's cloud-based cyber protection with CrowdStrike or other areas, fraud prevention on cloud with Forder, but we had pretty aggressive growth trends, but all of a sudden we're growing at a 50% faster than we thought. And it was bringing in years and years of growth. We had a 3-year plan. We're doing it in 18 months. And then the issue really became, when you talked about growth, it was really a human capital strategy. And going to come back to the prior conversation, because people can talk about, hey, we're going to put this money in, we're going to grow. But how are you going to grow? And it all comes back to human capital. So we were very early in this work from anywhere. CrowdStrike, one of the first major companies, a $50 billion market cap, that started off work from everywhere. And we remember that I bring in investors to look at investing alongside of us. They go, well, where's the headquarters? Well, there really isn't one, and it was hard. How do you put $1 billion in something that doesn't have a headquarters? I mean, we created one, and of course now we'll probably have to move it out of California, like everybody else. But it was really I think just the acceleration of growth was the most surprising thing. Just how quickly things, turned around and then accelerated. And it's obvious, I guess, in retrospect. Everything's obvious in retrospect. Like Ford works with Home Depot. They went from 5% of their transactions being digital to 100% being digital. And what does that mean when your card not present for fraud? And what if you automating a call center, and then all of a sudden your call center employees can't go to work, so you have to automate everything. I mean, it's the pace of it. I was talking to Eric from Zoom an hour or so ago, and he talked about having to buy 10,000 servers a day equivalent, in terms of speed. I mean, so I think just the speed and scope of the IT spend and how that just brought in, years of change was the biggest thing we had to get used to. And then, of course, then we're faced with a question of, if you grow like that, you need more money. So what do? Do you put more money in, or is this a one-time growth spurt, or is it sustainable? So you have another, and I think we really doubled down on our winners, but that's what most of the market did, I think it's really, we were very, very fortunate last year, but quite a few other investors were as well.
Sheila, what surprised you the most as you look back over the last year?
I recall at the beginning of the pandemic having a conversation with one of the top software CEOs in the world. And the conversation was like, do you think anyone's going to build any new relationships, right? Is this going to be kind of a moment in time where we sort of stop building new relationships and we know who we know, but we're not going to meet new people? And this has been an interesting year because I think it's been, obviously there's a lot of bad to the pandemic, but if you lean into the ability to, in real time, connect with anyone, anywhere, I've seen much incredible new relationship building that is for business, for other aspects, community building, right? That communities have been able to come together and find each other on different topics. That's been really incredible. The other side of that, though, has been old relationships. So last night I had a corp dev reunion on Zoom with our old colleagues. Same with my high school classmates, right? So you're able to actually to reach back to these old relationships and really connect and tie back into people that have been in your life, but then also build new ones. And I tell all of our portfolio companies, business development is better now than it's ever been, because pretty much everyone is willing to get on a Zoom call for, 10, 15 minutes, understand what a company is doing, see if there's a partnership opportunity, and build and extend their network. That's been incredible.
I think you've made a number of points there. And one of the surprises for many is business development. I want to just emphasize that point you made, in a sense that was, as I've done these podcasts, not having to move. You can reach almost any CEO in the world, any head of a government agency, instead of asking them to fly to Los Angeles. The very last conference I went to was first the Milken Institute conference in Saudi Arabia, UAE, Bahrain, and South Africa. But then the March conference last year, the Montgomery conference here, was the last one I went to. And the enormous enthusiasm at that conference, I remember well. and how quickly it changed in a week or two. Nagraj, what do you see? What surprised you the most in the last year that you didn't expect?
Yeah, Mike, so given my gray hair, I went through the last big dip, which is I would say the 08, 09 financial crisis. What I remember from that time was almost everybody was running around without a clue as to what to do because nobody had a playbook. And what surprised me a little bit with this one was how quickly our startups reacted and adapted. And, in hindsight, there was enough people that I think went through the last crisis that actually understood what needed to be done, that maybe advised the startup community in a much more, I would say, calm manner. But I also was really, really surprised by how some of these first-time CEOs and founders just took a breath in March, started making changes in April, figured out the excess burn that was spending. They figured all of that out. They went to all digital sales and marketing, like the BD time, the business development you talked about, and they didn't really miss a beat. Frankly speaking, there was March, there was April, and then come May, they were all ready to go. And then the surprising thing happened is a few months later, they figured we were just spending on things we didn't really need. And then, as Sheila and Jamie said, business came pouring. So now you have this double whammy in a good way, that you reduced your expenses and your sales are going through the roof. And that has led to this acceleration. But I come back to how much surprised I was at how calmly some of these first-time CEOs and founders reacted and just really kept going. Now, of course, it's been 12 months, close to 12 months. The employee resilience has also been really surprising to me. I mean, if you think of the employees, we talk about work from home, but there's so many challenges. There's so many challenges for whether it's young parents with kids, not in school, sort of whether it's living in a small apartment where both partners are working. These are all things that we've all gotten past. Now, I do think there's a human cost to it, and I think it's going to come due soon. And I think everybody is looking for ways to get back to some sort of normal. But that resilience over 12 months has also been very surprising to me.
So if I was to paraphrase some of the things the three of you said, I'd say one thing that surprised people was the relationship between employees, customers, suppliers, communities, etc. And as I interviewed the largest employers, for example, in the United States, the CEO of Target or the CEO of Kroger and many others, they were very focused, or the CEO of E&Y, they were focused on the interaction between their own employees and staying in touch with their own employees. One of the things that struck me as a follow-up in the relationship with the community that Sheila kind of commented on is when a change and the focus on social justice occurred in May of last year. And there's a report that's put out every year by Credit Suisse, and it shows somewhat the results of this resilience you spoke about, particularly in technology and others. But you can see here that the United States has by far any country that has more than 20 million people in it. Australia and the United States have the highest percentage of millionaires. But you will also see here of all developed countries in the world, including Greece or Italy, etc., the US has the highest percentage of its citizens that are also the poorest. So some of these issues of social justice, some of the issues of income inequality, you can see here where those that own real estate Residential real estate had prices, those that were invested in technology had substantial increases in their net worth. But this came to fore, and one of the things that really surprised me in my interviews with so many people is a reevaluation of what was an essential worker. And in the neighborhood I live in, when the UPS, Federal Express, Amazon trucks came to the neighborhood, you actually had people step outside and applaud them and thank them who were working. You saw the same thing happen in retail, particularly grocery stores, where people were out there and thanking the workers. And so this appreciation of what is an essential worker and the importance of their job, I would expect to see a great deal of follow through this year. Now, when we were talking, Nagraj, you used the term shift left. Now, if we were in Washington, D.C., I could fully understand that with the change in the administration. But maybe share with us, what did you mean by that term shift left?
Mike, I just want to make sure I give credit where it's due. It's actually Sheila who mentioned that term. I did
Okay,
a
well, we're now giving that credit to Sheila.
Yes, let's give the credit to Sheila. But I think Sheila and I were, I think, saying the same thing, which is in today's environment, and I take whether it's security as an example or privacy, and I think even digital accessibility, all of these three things, I think, are basically getting incorporated earlier and earlier into the software development cycle. So instead of doing this after the fact, instead of adding security as a bolt-on or adding privacy as bolt-on or adding digital accessibility as a bolt-on and going from a top-down perspective, it's basically becoming, hey, when you're developing the code, make sure to include all of these aspects, starting, I think, with security. I think during a conversation, I mentioned the company, again, not a portfolio company, just to make sure I mentioned that.
Sneak.
Sheila, since you now are the author of this term.
Yes, Sneak is a good example of that. And a company that I think also exemplifies this on the digital accessibility, which I do think is a real issue of the fact that even in today's day and age, we have not made our websites fully accessible. And that also a company that, again, not in my portfolio at all, but Events, which is also taking that approach and saying, let's put that into the development process. And so when you come out of the development process and the code is there, you have solved 60 to 80% of the issues. And then, of course, you always have something manual to do. But these are all examples of things moving left, not in the DC moniker, but more in a tech or Silicon Valley nomenclature.
Sheila?
I completely agree with Nagraj. I think that's an incredibly strong summary of the point. Maybe I'll try to build on top of that by saying, for us, shift left is the continuation of taking control to the developer, right? Engineering the cloud, right? But doing so, letting devs be in charge, letting devs use their known language to do that. One of our portfolio companies, Pulumi, does that in an incredible way. But I might say something sort of more future forward, because I know Jamie likes a little controversy. So as you think about where the world is going, right? So devs build applications and they get access to data, and they've historically done that in a very kind of typical fashion. Now we can all agree probably that those apps are becoming more distributed. One example of the distributed nature of those apps is kind of how blockchain works with its smart contracts, right? Where we're able to code into the blockchain what happens from an IP perspective. Well, one of the interesting things that we're seeing right now is the artists, like the artists of the world, are showing us some of the way on these business models with NFTs, so non-fungible tokens, around digital art. And one of my favorite recent stories is one of my partners just bought a Gucci ghost, right, from the artist Trevor Andrew. And he bought and sold a Gucci ghost, which is a piece of digital art. And within that NFT, where you see a lot of collectibles, art community things kind of working today, there is a payment structure that can follow it all the way through as that gets bought and sold by different parties. Interestingly, we have developers these days, right? They've, for a long, long time, used their skill set to make a living at their day job, also to participate in things like open source communities and building these codes, which frankly, open source is, these are just massively distributed scenarios, right? So why can't we inside code program that developers get paid all the way along through for something like an open source project? So if I fork that project, I still have to sort of economically compensate everything that came before me. And I think Nagraj's point about shift left is that this is the changing of the guard to where developers get to be in more control of their art, their IP. And I think that's a really interesting scenario.
So Jamie, let me go to you. There was a period of time where we did not have data, particularly if I take biological data.
Yeah.
Today, we have a lot of data.
Mhm.
And so as I think about developers, and now I'm moving to machine learning, AI, who's writing the algorithms to analyze the data. It would seem to me that it's the analysis of this data and the insights one gets that now has the increasing value. How do you see the relationship between developers and AI or machine learning?
Well, I think there's only a few, really top scientists are moving the science of AI. So a lot of it is more basic algorithms over large databases. So we kind of view it two ways. And sometimes we will find the most advanced scientists and AI experts in the world, like we've done with ASAP, and have them work on a real world problem. And with some remarkable outcomes. For example, they were able to automate call centers during COVID. So over 80% of the functions could be done by the intelligent agent, and to allow the agents to handle more calls at the same time with better customer satisfaction, much lower cost. And that, but a lot of the basic functions on automation are, again, taking something and it's pretty straightforward. I mean, you're building a massive database. You've got state-of-the-art data scientists. Forder does this with looking at large databases for fraud. CrowdStrike does it with 1 trillion events a week and looking at their databases. And it's just kind of machine learning expertise. It's almost becoming, there's a lot of buzzwords around AI, but it's just having good data scientists and giving them the resources they need. Tasso has built a world-leading CDP at Action IQ, and I think we just see a shortage of talent. To get the world's best talent and keep them, they have to work on challenging big problems in a good environment, and we try and give them the resources they need to be successful, the flexibility they need to work on projects that are interesting to them, a culture that appeals to them, a work from anywhere environment. I mean, it's all the things we've talked about. So I'm not sure I have a lot more insights than that, Mike, on that one. We've been extremely successful in investing in this area. So, but there's a lot of money has gone into AI and a lot of science projects out there that we've avoided. We've tried to focus on the best talent, focusing on real world. I think it will accelerate a lot this year. I think the real application of 5G, and Nagraj is very close to it, was Qualcomm pedigree is bringing, it's really 5G. One should think of it as really 4G, which brought us, Uber and all these apps, was really about ubiquitous communications tied to location and constant, connectivity. 5G brings us really ubiquitous computing. And if you can do ubiquitous computing, that will allow you to run really tight algorithms in very focused environments that we haven't been able to do. And For example, Foghorn does that, does edge computing in the middle of an industrial environment or oil processing plant where you can run AI algorithms over a quarter raspberry processor. This is something that costs $1 at most, for in terms of processing power, and you can run the algorithms locally there by having the 5G connectivity rather than taking it back and running on AWS or Azure, bringing it back. So I think 5G is going to blow open the surface area for compute applications, and I think it's whether it's medicine or automotive will be other big sectors. But I think 5G might be the real accelerant to AI. But I'd be interested to get Nagraj and Sheila's perspective on that.
All right, well, let me shift a little bit, then I will go there. When you think about disrupting technologies, every single industry at some level has been disrupted and will be far more disruptive. And it doesn't make a difference whether it's agriculture, where we estimate that modern agriculture technologies, hydro farming, et cetera, could eliminate as many as 500 million jobs on the planet. But we've talked about fintech and healthcare. We've had, in many cases, a 40-fold increase in telemedicine visits, et cetera. When you think of the big challenges in business today, or for investors, Sheila, I'd like to start with you. Maybe you could pick one. How do you see them addressing using some of these accelerating technologies? Pick one of these industries maybe to talk about.
Sure, I'll pick environment. And one of the things that we've been spending a lot of time on is how do we think about the software and data pillars related to climate change, right? And a lot of the innovation related to that has historically been very, very hardware based. Batteries, EVs, if you look at where a lot of the money has been, and a lot of the buyer ecosystem has been, frankly, slow to move power companies, right? And as we look at where software can play more of a role, I think that there's sort of an interesting point of hardware is an essential point of disruption. How do you manage capacity on the grid? How do you manage different forms of energy, right, onto the grid? How do you then take data to understand what supply side looks like? So renewables is a great example where you have a lot of weather predictions that can give you supply side data to come in. And then how do you deal with individuals? And everyone keeps making the same point that talent is such an important element. We believe that employees and talent will say to their companies, hey, we don't want to work here if we're not understanding the climate impact of the business. We want to make sure that there's a company out there now that's doing a green benefit package, right? Like you can choose to offset not just from your company perspective, but to offset your home carbon footprint as well. And so then you sort of take that to the next logical step, which is customers. And frankly, the Gen Zers have shown us the way more than anyone on this, but customers are now saying, I want to make my purchase decisions with this in mind. So I actually need to understand the supply chain footprint, the human footprint of what I'm buying, and understand kind of all the way through that digital chain, what is the impact that I'm looking at? And I think there's an incredible amount of innovation that's happening in this area. And I think we'll see a lot more, frankly.
A couple comments on what you said. Number one, the sun is expected to have 4 billion years more of life. So there's a lot coming. We're using 10% of the sun at the moment. And obviously using technology today goes a long way in trying to solve some of these problems that you have highlighted. And the other thing I would mention to you, Sheila, that the 8 largest Canadian pension funds approached us late last year. Can we create a rating system for companies in the environmental area, and with the understanding that if you don't have a such and such rating, they collectively will not invest in your company. So we're talking 1.5 to 2 trillion here. So I think what you've highlighted is already begun to focus on some of the world's largest money managers. Nagraj, what industry or what area would you like to pick to talk a little bit about accelerating technologies, addressing some of these big challenges?
I think one of the areas that may be overlooked, or at least not as in vogue in the Valley, would be just manufacturing. I mean, the amount of digital transformation that is happening in, or needs to happen in manufacturing is tremendous. I mean, one specific area in robotics, if you think about robotics, the promise of robotics has been there for so long, but we really haven't seen widespread use of robotics in manufacturing. And one of the fundamental challenges has been, how do you program these robots? Programming robots turns out to be a very hard job. So basically what you've done is you've limited the amount of use of robots, because to program them, you need machine learning data scientists. I'm exaggerating, but and you can't do that. How do you democratize use of robots? And so companies that can actually help make programming robots easier, and there's a number of them in the startup world, will sort of unleash the next set of innovation. This area has not seen fundamental change because of companies that are in the field are, in our words, we use the term legacy quite a bit, but they are truly companies that were born in the 70s and 80s. And the software paradigm that has swept across so many different industries hasn't touched this one, which means robots are just not flexible. They're not teachable. Those are all things that I think in the next few years, software will touch. And once software touches that, that becomes accessible to the factory worker who, when an automotive car is sort of going through the line, can in real time teach a robot how to put a windshield on. Once you do that once, the next time, robotic arm can do it. That sort of can fundamentally change the usage of robotics in the area. The last thing I would say is, we talked about machine learning in the beginning. These are all enabled by AI and machine learning, clearly. The one challenge I do see as an industry, we talk about it, but it's kind of hard to address, and we don't address it, is ultimately the biases of the real world end up in the algorithms for machine learning and AI, because you talked about developers. The representation is just not there. The lack of representation in folks who are in machine learning, the developers, is showing up with biases in machine learning models and algorithms. So I think there'll be very fundamental changes in how we use, whether it's robots in manufacturing or what Sheila talked about, environment, because of advanced AI and machine learning. We still have to fundamentally think, let's not make sure to repeat the mistakes humans did in biases, just continue that along and put that into the models and algorithms that machine learning is sort of enabling.
Jamie, when I heard you talking about 5G, I could just think about a meeting I was in with Steve Ross from Warner and the head technology people on, would people buy a DVD? Because it took 2 DVDs and 4 sides to put a movie on at that time. And so you had to put it in, get up, turn it over, take it out, put another one in, and turn it over. And in our recent discussion in 5G in South Korea, they were commenting they can download a movie in 1 second. So the world has changed a great deal in the last 35 years. Would you like to comment about any of these industries that you're investing in, Jamie? And
yeah, thank you, Mike.
solving?
Look, I think manufacturing is an area that was probably delayed last year during COVID. Getting people into factories, getting the work done when people working remotely, and I think there was a real slowdown in industrial software. And one of the issues has been that there's been a lack of standards in the operating technology world. We call it the OT world compared to the IT world. It reminds me of early in my career, in the early 80s, you had a technology stack that was closed. And then when Oracle came along and you had common databases that kind of blew it open, you had a ton of innovation at all different layers of the stack. The manufacturing world still has these closed stack systems from Schneider, Siemens, Honeywell, et cetera. But as there's standardization evolving, I think you'll see a lot of innovation that Nagraj is referring to. And Darius Adamczyk from Honeywell spoke about that this morning, and is a friend. And Mike, maybe we go down and visit the world's most advanced factory in Charlotte this fall when it opens up with Darius. It might be a fun outing after COVID. I think some of the areas there's sort of a flip side to this. I think we're going to be in an environment that's not as benign from a tax and regulatory point of view, the tech world. So I think we need to continue to focus on big societal challenges and address those with technology, and whether it's financial accessibility with earn-in, providing really liquidity to the working class who don't have savings, as you pointed out. Technology accessibility, I think AI and jobs, there's a lot of focus on job training, but the whole move to no-code software really opens the envelope for broader participation in the workforce in software, and Uncork's a leader in that. They were just presented earlier today. I think ESG, which Sheila was talking to, we have a whole session on that tomorrow afternoon on whether it's modern day human slavery, in effect, carbon capture, supply chain visibility, sustainability. There's a great company from Vancouver, Sheila, maybe we should look at, called Skyhive, that provides training in the workforce for places like Syria and whatnot. I mean, I think there's a lot to be done in ESG, which I think we really need to step up as a sector. And I think, Mike, I think healthcare is still the big area that's kind of, Moderna and some of the developments point to the opportunities. And I think the whole, the intersection of data sciences and genomic scientists, and the combination of those two, I think we're going to enter a golden age there where we can take on big societal challenges of public health and cost effectively. And I think if anything comes out of this terrible COVID situation, perhaps that has been accelerated by 5 or 10 years. So super excited about, all these challenges. There's an opportunity on the flip side of it. We've tried to be thoughtful over the next 2 days to address many of these, and I think, both you and I, Mike, we like to invest in companies that are going to make a difference to the world. And I think we, want to continue to do that. It's great to have great fun and do well and do our role in the community and whatnot. But it's even better if we can create, expand the envelope of opportunity for others and deal with some real issues in society.
So over the last 11 to 12 months, I've really focused on leadership. How are people managing their workforces, their focus of a CEO or a leader or senior management, their significant concern about the health of their own employees? I remember Brian Cornell calling me up from Target and mentioning to me that as things started to open up in the summer in many cities, he had a lot of customers coming into the store without masks and bringing their kids, just running around the store. And how did he protect other customers, and how does he protect his employees? You've all addressed this issue of more flexibility in where you work, but what other innovations do you see in how companies might manage their workforces in the future? Has this pandemic changed in many ways the way leaders manage their talent? Sheila, let's start with you.
So definitely, I think is the answer to the question, Mike, and it's a great question. One thing I might highlight is one of the roles we're seeing as most important now in companies is the head of corporate comms, right? And it's an interesting kind of something I wouldn't have predicted, frankly, that the ability for companies to communicate with employees has become mission critical. It needs to be done in a way that kind of scales to everyone, but it also needs to involve some creativity. And it does put CEOs into the role of sort of saying, hey, what is my kind of, Twitter profile? What am I doing to connect with my employees on intranets and corporate communication systems? And how am I podcasting to my organization? If my organization has a perspective on a political issue, right? A lot of CEOs, everyone wanted to know, what's your perspective on Black Lives Matter last summer, right? And as we continue to kind of discuss DEI and racial equality. And so one thing I think that's really interesting is having a perspective, having a personality, having a political voice of these companies, right? You saw sort of after the January 6th issues in Washington, you saw companies saying that they wouldn't give money to certain politicians who had participated in that for a period of time, right? Employees are looking for this. They're looking for this information. They need to have ways to understand it and find it. And leaders actually have to bring more of their whole selves to work now, be it their kind of, their fun persona, right? Where they're truly letting people in a little bit to them, but also then being able to share new and different experiences with employees. So, the CEO of Starbucks, right, as they opened up in China, how is he talking about that with his global employees in a kind of multi-language webcast format? So I think there's a lot that leadership will step up to, and I think a lot of it will be comm centric.
Let's go.
Can I come on that, Sheila? I mean,
Yeah.
I think this ability to tell stories, Mike, is so much important now with entrepreneurs, and whether it's telling, in a positive way, communicating with their employees, their investors, or their customers. Oftentimes we'll come across a very good entrepreneur, but we just think that person will never be able to scale the business because he won't be able to recruit the team, or raise the capital, or be able to differentiate his product in the market. So that storytelling is a very important attribute. I thought Sheila was going to say the most important, one of the most important hires was the chief people officer. We had a call last weekend when one of our companies hired a good friend of Sheila's. And
you got a fantastic person.
Yeah, thank you. We're so excited, and we were simultaneously talking to Sheila, recruiting her. So it was kind of, but there's a talent war out there, and these data scientists, these top people across the field, technical, business, marketing, sales, they have many choices of where they can go work, or not just work, but as a career, and they really want to buy into a mission, a company where they can go to, where they can make a difference. And it's hard, Google and Facebook, others have been paying top dollar. That's probably where you can differentiate yourself as an innovative company. It's like, look, if you leave Google, no one's going to notice, no matter how senior you are, or Facebook. But I think this need for a mission and the ability of the CEO to tell the story around that. And then once they get there, in a remote environment, it's one thing to say, hey, okay, let's all work remotely, but you have to be very intentional about how that really works long term. Short term, you can get away with it with Slack, Smartsheet, all the different tools. But long term, in terms of really cultivating the next generation of talent, coaching, mentoring, development, team building, you're growing your headcount by 30 to 50%. So half your company hasn't met the other half. How do you keep retention down? Those are really intentional issues that have to be very intentionally managed. And I think that's a skill set that we're, putting a lot of focus on within the organizations that we work with.
There's very few companies that have to deal with the diversity of businesses, the diversity of senior executives as SoftBank. How do you look at the role of the leader in determining whether to invest in the company, and what role do you play in coaching leadership, maybe with what's occurred in the last year, that they have to run their company differently no matter how successful they are? How does SoftBank do that? How do you do that?
So Mike, given I've been at SoftBank for all of a week and a half, I'm going to try to draw upon my experiences a little bit from Tola and Microsoft. But I do think a lot of the things that Sheila and Jamie mentioned, the CEO leading with a mission making sure everybody buys into that mission, but then also, giving the space to a CEO cannot actually engage with every employee. And so having the managers the space and the flexibility to and the tools to help their employees, their individual teams be productive, be safe, be healthy, is been so critical over the last year. I saw that firsthand, not only at Microsoft, but also at my portfolio companies that were successful. The leaders coming out and setting the tone and then giving the space for the next level, for the following level. For example, so many of our companies did digital water coolers. I did digital water coolers for my team. And that's to Sheila's point of, hey, how do we bring something more different or fun into an environment where everybody's becoming 24/7? There's no break from work because essentially you're at home. And so how do you get things into the workplace with your professional colleagues that is a little bit more personal? That, you bring your whole self, you don't sort of leave that behind because there's nowhere to leave behind. You're still in the same place. You are at 8 o'clock in the morning and where you are at 8 p.m. at night. So I've seen really innovative ways to engage employees, both at the most senior level with setting the mission, but also at every other level, making sure your employees are being treated very, very differently. So to Jamie's point, the chief people officer is critical. To Sheila's point, how do you communicate to employees? How do you make them feel welcome? How do you make them feel like their needs are getting heard? All of that comms piece is so critical. I'm actually quite impressed by how the leaders in our industry and actually overall in the country have adapted and sort of really put their best foot forward. There's always exceptions to it, but it's been like tremendous to see everybody step up.
So in closing the panel, one more question. The title of your session is The World of Investing Post-COVID. So if you had to pick, each of you, 2 areas that you think are going to be opportunistic opportunities here in a post-COVID environment, what would they be? Since you labeled the name of the panel, Jamie, I'm going to start with you.
Well, Mike, first of all, it's a great question. And, we deal with this issue every day. And we're always willing to be surprised. I have every week I see a company that's now worth $1 billion that I didn't invest in an early stage. So we're more often wrong than right. I just say, I think this collaboration tools for build around human capital and dealing with that's the most important aspect of these companies for their sustainable growth. Perhaps it's overinvested in, but I still don't think that it's done yet. I think there's a long way to go there. And the second area, I still think it's early innings in fintech. I think 2 years ago we had Dan Schulman down, and you interviewed him and talked about accessibility of finance, but also just innovation in finance. And I think there's trillions of dollars up for grabs there, and I think it probably comes down to going after some of the core banking functions with IT and allowing an API world to be built on top of that. So with that, Sheila probably has better ideas than me. So why don't you go next?
So I love Jamie's ideas. I love collab. I love fintech. I would add to it things that enable comms, right? What we just talked about with employees, like how do you create community in general with employees, with customers, with different shared interest groups. And then my second one would be, elements of technology that are engaging and help us to do business better together, but that are fun. And let's bring fun back.
It's interesting, Sheila. One of the interviews I did was with the CEO of Mattel. And his comment is, you could cancel a lot of things during COVID-19, but you can't cancel play and fun. And those people that provide those will do well from that standpoint. All right, the last member of our team, what are the two areas you're going to guide us? And then we'll see what you do for SoftBank.
Yeah, Mike, I was going to filibuster that question because Jamie and Sheila are, far smarter than I am. The way I've approached investing for whatever 17 years is every investment in some way opportunistic. And you try your best as a VC to have a prepared mind, but then you see something you never anticipated. And then you have to quickly figure out, is this sort of something you want to get involved with? It's a 7, 8, 9 year, 10-year journey or not. And I think, if I look back and said, when I was, sort of saw Zoom and invested in it pre-Series A, do I think I was prepared for that? No, I was not. There was enough collaboration tools at that point in time that I would have not say that, hey, I saw this coming. And so I always have this open mind. And I also used to use this term of dollar cost averaging and like never be out of the market. But then, one of my ex-colleagues at M12 gave me an even better phrase. His phrase was, time in market is better than timing the market. So
Yeah.
my phrase is really, I just want to keep investing. I'm going to see opportunities. I have to be really fast and better than anybody else at taking advantage of it. But if I could predict those opportunities, hey, I would be starting a company right now. And I'm not good at that.
Well, I'll give you another tip that I've seen. If you invest in the portfolio of companies presenting at the Montgomery conference, they have picked them and it creates a great opportunity for rate of return. Jamie, I haven't calculated, but obviously the minute I was interviewing Dan Schulman at PayPal, I should have also been investing.
I
So
love
one,
Yeah, 100%
and I
agree.
remember you had Facebook. I forget what their market cap at that time on the private markets, but it was
About
off the wall.
$500 million. There's a lot of money made there. It's look, I think we just have to keep at it and keep discipline. I know, Mike, you bring up, there's a lot of, a lot of valuation concerns right now, but there's a great company will play through this. And there's a lot of liquidity out there. So I think we all have to take liquidity when we can. And hopefully, we can just kind of keep doing what we're doing and have a lot of fun working with great people like you and Sheila and Nagraj and, make the world a better place as well.
Right. Well, I want to thank you for joining us today. It was great to listen to your insights, and I wish you all the best, and particularly during the next day and a half of the Montgomery conference.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
Thank
Jay.
you.
Thank you, Sheila.